The richest people in the room laughed at the waitress for exactly 43 seconds before they realized she was the smartest person there. Snow pressed softly against the towering windows of the Blackstone Grand Hotel, while downtown Chicago glowed beneath winter lights and slow-moving traffic far below the ballroom. Inside, warmth shimmered beneath massive crystal chandeliers where hundreds of executives, investors, reporters, and technology leaders gathered for one of the most important corporate events of the year, the annual Carlyle Innovations Global Summit. Gold light reflected across polished marble floors, while jazz music floated gently through conversations worth millions of dollars. Giant LED screens surrounded the ballroom stage displaying graphs, market projections, and the silver logo of Carlyle Innovations beside the words "The future is now." Ethan Carlyle stood at the center of it all beneath soft amber lighting, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit with silver cufflinks and the calm expression of a man accustomed to controlling every room he entered. 44 years old, founder of one of the fastest-growing artificial intelligence companies in America. Business magazines called him brilliant. Employees called him impossible. Tonight, investors watched him like the future itself depended on whatever came out of his mouth next. And maybe it did. Near the ballroom entrance, Chloe Bennett balanced a silver tray filled with champagne flutes while moving carefully between tables of wealthy guests discussing acquisitions, private equity, and stock forecasts with the kind of confidence only rich people mastered. Her black waitress uniform blended neatly into the background, while soft curls of blonde hair rested loosely behind one ear. Invisible. That was usually the safest way to survive rooms like this. Table 12 wants sparkling water, another waitress whispered while rushing past her near the service station. Chloe nodded calmly. I will handle it. Across the ballroom, applause erupted as Ethan Carlyle stepped onto the main stage beside a massive digital presentation screen glowing blue behind him. Camera flashes scattered through the ballroom, while investors lifted phones discreetly toward the billionaire executive. Ethan adjusted the microphone once. Tonight, he said smoothly, we announced the largest predictive analytics expansion in company history. More applause followed immediately. Chloe moved quietly through the crowd, refilling champagne glasses while giant graphs illuminated the ballroom walls above everyone's heads. She barely looked at the presentation until one particular slide appeared across the massive LED screens near the ceiling. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Something was wrong. Ethan continued speaking confidently from the stage, while financial projections rotated behind him. Our adaptive forecasting model reduced market volatility exposure by 42% during beta testing. Executives nodded approvingly around the room. Reporters typed quickly into tablets. Investors smiled beside expensive wine glasses. But Chloe stopped moving for half a second near table 14, because one data category on the presentation screen repeated an impossible pattern. Tiny, nearly invisible, yet completely wrong. She glanced toward the ballroom stage again, while Ethan explained growth projections to the audience beneath the chandeliers. Her expression tightened thoughtfully. Near the front tables, a senior executive noticed Chloe staring upward. Excuse me, he muttered impatiently while extending his empty champagne flute. Chloe immediately lowered her eyes politely and replaced the glass. Sorry, sir. But her attention drifted toward the presentation again moments later. The forecasting percentages were misaligned against the quarterly market cycle. Not dramatically, just enough to quietly distort the final prediction outcome. Most people in the ballroom would never notice. But Chloe noticed, because before waitressing full-time, she spent 3 years studying statistical modeling and systems analysis before her mother became sick and tuition disappeared from her life faster than opportunity usually did. Ethan continued speaking confidently from the stage. Our predictive platform identifies instability before competitors even recognize market movement. Chloe almost frowned beneath her calm expression. No, the model was identifying instability incorrectly because someone adjusted the sequence weighting formula without recalibrating seasonal variance data. The room applauded another chart. Chloe remained still beside a marble column, holding the champagne tray against one hand while snow drifted beyond the windows outside. Finally, she exhaled quietly beneath her breath. That projection is going to fail. Excuse me. Chloe turned slightly. A woman in a dark red designer dress stared at her with visible annoyance beside table 14. Miranda Hayes, Senior Operations Director at Carlisle Innovations. Did you just comment on the presentation? Chloe immediately lowered her voice. I apologize. Miranda crossed her arms. No. Repeat what you said. Several nearby executives glanced over curiously now. Chloe hesitated briefly before answering carefully. One of the forecasting inputs appears incorrect. Silence touched the table instantly. Then laughter followed. Not cruel at first, just dismissive. The kind rich people used when entertaining themselves with someone they already considered beneath them. Miranda smiled sharply. The Waitress thinks our predictive analytics team made a mistake. A few executives laughed harder now into their wine glasses. Chloe kept her posture calm. I only noticed the market cycle variance does not align with the weighting sequence on slide 6. The laughter stopped immediately this time. Miranda blinked once. One older investor frowned toward the presentation screen. Another executive adjusted his glasses while staring upward more carefully now. Ethan Carlisle noticed the shift in energy from the stage almost instantly. His gray eyes moved across the ballroom until they landed on the Waitress standing beside table 14, holding a silver champagne tray, while executives suddenly looked less amused than before. Ethan stepped slightly away from the microphone. Is there a problem? Miranda gave a short laugh. Apparently your Waitress is auditing the presentation. More scattered laughter followed across nearby tables. Ethan looked directly at Chloe beneath the ballroom lights. Calm blue eyes. Black Waitress uniform. Champagne tray balanced steadily against one hand despite dozens of executives now watching her. And what exactly, Ethan asked coolly, does the Waitress think is wrong with my presentation? The ballroom quieted beneath the chandeliers while snow continued falling softly outside the Chicago skyline. Chloe met his gaze without fear. The volatility forecast is using an outdated seasonal adjustment formula. Complete silence spread across the ballroom after that. Even the jazz music near the entrance suddenly sounded too small for the tension now growing beneath the crystal lights. The ballroom remained frozen beneath crystal chandeliers while hundreds of wealthy guests stared toward the Waitress standing beside table 14 with a silver tray balanced calmly against one hand. Snow continued drifting across the massive Chicago windows behind the stage while the giant presentation screens glowed blue above everyone's heads. Ethan Carlisle did not move for several seconds. Neither did anyone else. The silence after Chloe Bennett's statement felt heavier than the expensive marble beneath their feet. Somewhere near the ballroom entrance, a champagne glass clinked softly against a silver tray before immediately stopping again. Miranda Hayes folded her arms tightly beside the investor table. That is absurd, she said sharply. Do you even understand what predictive weighting models are? Chloe answered quietly without changing her expression. Yes. A few executives exchanged uncomfortable glances now. Ethan stepped slowly away from the stage microphone beneath the amber lights. Calm, controlled, dangerous in the quiet way successful men often became when challenged publicly. You are telling me, he said evenly, that my lead analytics division missed an error visible to a hotel waitress carrying champagne? Some laughter returned around the ballroom, though weaker this time. Chloe kept her voice polite. I did not say they missed it intentionally. Ethan descended the stage steps slowly while every investor in the room watched the interaction unfolding between the billionaire executive and the waitress in black serving attire. Then explain it. Miranda looked stunned. Ethan, no, his eyes never left Chloe. I want to hear this. The ballroom lights reflected softly across polished floors as Ethan stopped directly in front of her now. Up close, Chloe noticed faint exhaustion behind his gray eyes despite the confidence he projected to the world, the kind carried by people who had not trusted rest in years. You have 1 minute, Ethan said coolly. Convince me my presentation is flawed. Several executives smiled expectantly, clearly anticipating her humiliation. Chloe glanced briefly toward the massive presentation screen still displaying the forecasting model behind Ethan's shoulder. Then she carefully set the silver champagne tray onto a nearby table beneath the chandeliers. Calmly, no trembling hands, no dramatic gestures. That unsettled Ethan more than confidence would have. Your market volatility model is weighting seasonal consumer behavior against historical recession patterns from the previous quarter. Chloe explained quietly. A few executives frowned upward toward the screen. She continued, but the model does not account for post-holiday correction shifts in regional purchasing behavior. Miranda scoffed immediately. That is impossible. Those adjustments were integrated weeks ago. Chloe nodded once. Partially. Ethan's expression sharpened slightly. Partially. Chloe pointed subtly toward the projection screen. The fourth layer adjustment sequence repeats after the second predictive cycle. Complete silence spread again beneath the chandeliers. One older investor adjusted his glasses while staring harder at the chart. Another executive quietly opened a tablet and began checking internal numbers. Ethan crossed his arms slowly. And what exactly does that cause? Chloe met his gaze directly now. It inflates the stabilization forecast by almost 11%. The room shifted instantly after that. Not loudly, quietly, like the emotional pressure inside the ballroom suddenly changed direction. Miranda pulled out her company tablet quickly while several analytics directors near the front tables exchanged nervous looks. Ethan remained still. That would not affect long-term projections significantly. Chloe answered almost immediately. It would tonight. Ethan narrowed his eyes slightly. Explain. Chloe glanced toward the giant ballroom windows where snow blurred against the Chicago skyline outside. Because your investors are not buying long-term confidence tonight. Her voice stayed calm and measured. They are buying short-term stability. Several people near the front tables stopped pretending not to listen now. Chloe continued softly. If the correction sequence is wrong, then the volatility exposure shown in your presentation is inaccurate. Ethan studied her face carefully beneath the ballroom lights. How long did it take you to notice this? Chloe shrugged lightly. About 30 seconds. A younger executive accidentally laughed from pure disbelief before immediately stopping when Ethan looked toward him. Miranda stepped closer now, visibly irritated. This is ridiculous. She probably overheard something from the technology staff earlier. Chloe shook her head calmly. No, Miranda's tone sharpened. Then how would a waitress know any of this? For the first time all evening, emotion flickered softly across Chloe's expression. Not embarrassment. Something sadder. I studied systems analytics at Northwestern before leaving school. Miranda blinked once. You left? Chloe nodded. My mother got sick. Silence settled briefly again. Ethan looked at her differently now. Slightly. Not trust yet. Curiosity, which somehow felt more dangerous. And now you work here. Chloe glanced toward the silver tray beside the table. Bills do not disappear because people are intelligent. No one laughed after that line. Across the ballroom, several investors now whispered quietly among themselves while technology staff checked data models nervously on glowing tablets. One analytics director suddenly approached Ethan from behind with visible tension across his face. Sir, he murmured carefully, the adjustment sequence may actually be duplicated. The room changed completely after those words. Executives who laughed earlier suddenly avoided eye contact. Miranda's face lost color beneath the chandelier lights. Ethan remained absolutely motionless while the giant forecasting model glowed behind him across the ballroom walls. Then slowly, very slowly, he looked back toward Chloe Bennett standing quietly beside table 14 in a simple black waitress uniform, while some of the smartest executives in America scrambled to verify what she noticed in under a minute. Interesting, Ethan said softly. Chloe lowered her eyes politely. I did not mean to interrupt the presentation. Ethan almost smiled then. Not warmly. More like someone realizing the room no longer belonged entirely to him. You did not interrupt it, he answered quietly. You may have saved it. Nearby investors exchanged uneasy looks now, while reporters typed rapidly into phones beneath the ballroom lights. Miranda stepped closer again, voice tight with embarrassment. Even if she caught a formatting issue, that does not mean she understands the actual platform. Ethan never looked away from Chloe. No, he said calmly. But it means someone in this room underestimated her. Snow continued falling softly beyond the towering windows, while jazz music drifted faintly through the ballroom again. Yet something invisible had already shifted beneath the chandeliers tonight. Because for the first time in years, Ethan Carlisle no longer looked like the smartest person in the room. And everyone there knew it. The ballroom no longer sounded like a celebration. Beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Blackstone Grand Hotel, conversations had fractured into nervous whispers while executives refreshed data dashboards on glowing tablets and reporters quietly updated headlines before the official presentation had even resumed. Snow drifted steadily beyond the towering windows overlooking downtown Chicago, softening the city lights outside, while tension sharpened inside the ballroom with every passing second. Chloe Bennet stood beside table 14 exactly where she had been moments earlier, hands calmly folded in front of her black waitress uniform, while wealthy strangers continued staring at her like a puzzle nobody expected to exist. Ethan Carlyle remained near the center aisle beneath the amber ballroom lights, studying her with a focus that made several executives visibly uncomfortable. The billionaire no longer looked amused. He looked alert. Miranda Hayes stepped toward one of the analytics directors near the front tables and whispered sharply, "Tell me this is a coincidence." The director swallowed nervously while scrolling through projection data. "The sequence duplication is real." Miranda's expression tightened immediately. Nearby investors exchanged uneasy looks now. One elderly board member quietly removed his glasses and rubbed his forehead while staring toward the giant LED presentation screens above the ballroom stage. Ethan finally broke the silence. "How many people reviewed these numbers before tonight?" 3 executives avoided eye contact instantly. Another adjusted his tie without answering. Ethan's jaw tightened subtly. "That many, apparently." Chloe lowered her eyes politely. "The issue can still be corrected before final release." Miranda turned toward her sharply. "Nobody asked you." The sentence landed harder than intended beneath the suddenly quiet chandeliers. Several guests shifted awkwardly at nearby tables. Chloe simply nodded once without reacting emotionally. That somehow made Miranda appear smaller instead of stronger. Ethan noticed. Everything about tonight was beginning to expose people in ways they probably hated. A reporter near the ballroom entrance raised a phone slightly. "Mr. Carlyle," he called carefully, "is the company delaying the investor release?" Ethan never looked away from Chloe. "No," his answer came instantly. Calm. Controlled. "We are verifying a technical adjustment." More whispers spread across the ballroom. Investors hated uncertainty almost as much as they hated embarrassment. One wrong projection could shift millions of dollars before sunrise. Miranda stepped closer to Ethan now, lowering her voice tightly. "We should pause the event and move the board discussion upstairs privately." Ethan finally looked toward her. "And let reporters assume the system is unstable." Miranda hesitated. That is exactly what would happen." His voice stayed quiet, but sharp enough to silence her immediately. Across the ballroom, waitstaff continued moving cautiously between tables collecting untouched champagne glasses, while the jazz quartet near the entrance awkwardly resumed soft instrumental music no one listened to anymore. Chloe glanced toward the giant presentation screens again. Something still bothered her. Ethan noticed her expression instantly. "What?" Several executives turned toward her again. Chloe hesitated briefly before speaking carefully. "The correction sequence may not be the only problem." Complete silence returned immediately beneath the chandeliers. Miranda closed her eyes for half a second like someone trying to survive a migraine. "Wonderful," she muttered. Ethan stepped closer to Chloe now. "Explain." Chloe looked toward the ballroom screens, displaying rolling market projections behind the Carlyle Innovations logo. If the adjustment sequence duplicated incorrectly, then the adaptive response layer may also be referencing unstable predictive behavior. One executive frowned deeply. "That would affect the entire forecasting engine." Chloe nodded once. "Especially during live recalibration." Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. "You are saying the system could destabilize during tonight's investor sync?" Chloe answered honestly. "I do not know yet." The honesty in her voice unsettled him more than confidence would have. Most people around Ethan Carlyle spent their lives pretending certainty existed. Chloe Bennet spoke like someone comfortable admitting risk without dramatizing it. Another analytics director suddenly rushed toward Ethan carrying a tablet with visible panic hidden badly beneath professionalism. "Sir." Ethan took the device quickly. The director lowered his voice. "We are getting irregular server responses from the live predictive feed." Miranda stared at him. "What does that mean?" The director swallowed. "The investor dashboard is starting to reject synchronization requests." Several nearby executives immediately grabbed phones. One investor stood halfway from his chair before sitting back down again after realizing panic would only make the room worse. Ethan's expression hardened visibly now. How long before the live feed fails? We are not sure. The ballroom suddenly felt warmer despite the winter storm outside. Chloe watched the executives carefully while tension spread across the room like invisible electricity. Wealthy people often believed control lasted forever until technology reminded them otherwise. Ethan looked back toward her slowly. You predicted this? Chloe shook her head gently. No. Her blue eyes moved toward the giant presentation screens. But unstable correction layers usually create cascading behavior under heavy data traffic. Miranda laughed once beneath her breath. Not humor. Stress. This cannot be happening tonight. Ethan ignored her completely. Can your team fix it? He asked the analytics director. The man hesitated too long before answering. Possibly. Ethan's voice cooled several degrees instantly. That was not a reassuring pause. Across the ballroom, reporters now openly typed updates while investors whispered harder into phones beneath the chandeliers. One giant LED screen flickered suddenly before stabilizing again. A few guests noticed immediately. So did Ethan. So did Chloe. Her expression sharpened slightly now. The system is already destabilizing. Another flicker crossed the ballroom screens. This time longer. Several market projection graphs briefly disappeared before reappearing with delayed data. The room changed instantly after that. Panic never arrived loudly among wealthy people. It arrived quietly. Tightened shoulders. Faster typing. Forced smiles disappearing beneath expensive lighting. Ethan looked toward the ballroom stage where technicians rushed nervously behind glowing monitors now. Then he turned back toward Chloe Bennett, standing calmly beside table 14, while nearly everyone else in the room slowly lost composure. If you were running this system, he asked carefully, what would you do? Chloe looked surprised by the question itself. Not because of ego, because powerful men rarely asked ordinary people for answers in public. She glanced once more toward the unstable presentation screens while snow continued falling beyond the hotel windows. Then softly she answered, I would stop trying to protect the presentation and start protecting the architecture underneath it. Ethan stared at her for several seconds beneath the ballroom lights. And somewhere deep beneath the pressure, the investors, the cameras, and the collapsing projections, the billionaire executive realized the waitress standing in front of him was no longer interrupting the evening. She was becoming the only calm person left inside it. The first screen went black at exactly 9:47 p.m. A sharp wave of silence rolled through the ballroom beneath the crystal chandeliers as the giant LED display behind the stage flickered once, twice, then disappeared completely into darkness. Snow pressed against the towering Chicago windows while reflected city lights shimmered faintly across hundreds of frozen faces inside the Blackstone Grand Hotel. Then another screen failed. And another. Conversations stopped immediately. The jazz quartet near the ballroom entrance lowered their instruments halfway through a song while executives stared upward in disbelief at the collapsing presentation system surrounding the stage. Ethan Carlisle turned sharply toward the technical control booth near the ballroom wall. What is happening? A systems engineer rushed toward him holding a tablet glowing red with warning notifications. The predictive network is rejecting synchronization requests across all active servers. Miranda Hayes stepped forward quickly. Reset the live dashboard. We tried. The engineer answered breathlessly. The correction loop keeps duplicating itself. Another ballroom screen flashed violently before displaying rows of corrupted financial data across the wall. Gasps spread quietly through the investors near the front tables. Reporters immediately lifted phones higher now, while camera flashes reflected against the marble floors like bursts of cold lightning. Ethan's jaw tightened visibly. This was no longer a presentation problem. This was public failure unfolding in real time beneath a room full of billion-dollar investors. Chloe Bennett stood near table 14, watching the screens carefully while everyone around her grew louder, faster, more frantic. Yet the calmer she remained, the more obvious everyone else's panic became. Disconnect external feeds. Miranda ordered sharply toward the technology staff. Now. We cannot. Another engineer answered from the control station. The system architecture is cross-linked to the investor dashboards already connected worldwide. Ethan looked toward the ballroom stage where corrupted forecasting data continued rolling across the massive screens, like digital static swallowing the event alive. How long until total collapse? Nobody answered immediately. That silence told him enough. Nearby investors now openly whispered among themselves while stock analysts refreshed market applications on glowing phones beneath the chandeliers. One elderly board member leaned toward another executive and muttered, "If this leaks before morning trading." He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Ethan stepped toward the control booth, while security quietly began limiting press movement around the ballroom perimeter. "Fix it," Ethan said coldly. One exhausted systems analyst finally admitted what nobody else wanted to say aloud. "We do not know where the original instability started." Across the ballroom, Chloe's eyes narrowed slightly. Then she looked upward toward the frozen projection screens again. Something felt wrong. Not random wrong. Structured wrong. She moved slowly toward the ballroom edge near the technical station, while waitstaff and guests scattered around her carrying tension like static electricity. Ethan noticed her approaching immediately. Miranda did too. "Absolutely not." Miranda snapped before Chloe even spoke. Chloe ignored the hostility completely and focused on the monitors instead. "Your system is chasing its own corrections." One engineer frowned at her. "What?" Chloe pointed calmly toward the cascading error logs on the nearest screen. "The adaptive layer is trying to repair instability using duplicated predictive assumptions." Ethan stared toward the monitor. "Meaning?" Chloe's voice stayed level despite dozens of executives now listening again. "The more the system corrects itself, the worse the instability becomes." One systems engineer blinked hard. "It is creating recursive feedback." Chloe nodded once. "Exactly." Miranda folded her arms tightly. "So what?" Chloe looked toward the failing ballroom screens. "So your architecture is not broken." Her eyes shifted back toward the control station. "It is trapped." Ethan stepped closer now, studying her expression carefully beneath the dim ballroom lighting. "Can it be stopped?" Chloe hesitated briefly. Honest hesitation. Not fear. Calculation. "Yes." Every executive nearby turned toward her instantly. Miranda laughed sharply beneath her breath. "Of course." Chloe continued quietly. "But you have to shut down the adaptive response layer manually before the system reaches complete synchronization failure." One engineer looked horrified. "That would disconnect the entire investor network." "Temporarily," Chloe answered. "Better than letting the system corrupt every active data stream publicly." Ethan looked toward the ballroom screens again as another graph distorted across the display walls behind the stage. Investors were no longer pretending to stay calm now. Several stood from tables speaking urgently into phones while reporters quietly repositioned themselves near the ballroom entrance. Ethan understood exactly what the room smelled like now. Fear. Not financial fear. Reputation fear. The kind billion-dollar companies sometimes never recovered from. Miranda stepped beside him quickly. "We cannot hand system authority to a waitress in front of investors." Ethan looked at her slowly. "And we cannot let the company collapse in front of them either." Miranda lowered her voice. "You are letting panic cloud your judgment." Ethan's eyes moved briefly toward Chloe, standing beside the control booth beneath flickering blue monitor light. Calm. Focused. Completely unlike everyone else around her. "No," he answered quietly. "I think panic is finally clearing mine." Another ballroom screen went black. Then the audio system crackled loudly overhead before cutting into silence. The room physically flinched beneath the chandeliers. Ethan made his decision. "How long would you need?" Chloe blinked slightly. "What?" Ethan stepped directly toward her now while snowstorm reflections shimmered across the darkened ballroom windows behind them. "If I gave you access to the system." Complete silence spread around the control booth after that sentence. Miranda looked genuinely stunned. "Ethan." He ignored her entirely. Chloe stared at him carefully. "You do not even know me." Ethan glanced toward the collapsing ballroom screens one final time before answering. "Right now, that makes you the most trustworthy person here." Several executives looked offended immediately. Ethan did not care. He extended a security access card toward Chloe beneath the cold blue glow of the failing monitors. 5 minutes, he said quietly. "Save my company." Chloe looked down at the access card resting in his hand, while the ballroom continued unraveling around them beneath crystal chandeliers and winter light. Then slowly, without drama, without fear, the waitress accepted it. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly as emergency power systems redirected energy toward the failing network servers hidden behind the Blackstone Grand Hotel walls. Blue monitor light flickered across anxious executive faces, while snow continued falling outside the towering Chicago windows like the entire city had slowed down just to watch the collapse unfolding inside. Chloe Bennett stood at the technical control station beneath rows of glowing error logs, while dozens of systems engineers crowded around her in visible disbelief. The silver access card Ethan Carlisle handed her moments earlier rested beside the main console keyboard, like proof that tonight no longer made sense to anyone in the room. "Move," one senior engineer muttered impatiently toward another technician while trying to access the failing synchronization layer. Chloe remained perfectly still in the center of the chaos, reading the cascading code patterns across the monitors without rushing. That unsettled Ethan more than panic would have. Everyone else looked afraid of the system. Chloe looked like she was listening to it. Miranda Hayes stood several feet away with folded arms and visible frustration tightening across her face. "This is insane," she whispered toward Ethan. "You are letting a hotel waitress control a multi-billion-dollar platform." Ethan never looked away from Chloe. "No," he answered quietly. "I am letting the only calm person here try." Another ballroom screen flashed black before returning with distorted forecasting graphs rolling across the display walls behind the stage. Investors shifted harder now beneath the chandeliers while reporters whispered into phones near the ballroom entrance. The atmosphere no longer felt like a corporate summit. It felt like passengers realizing turbulence might actually become a crash. Chloe leaned slightly closer toward the main monitor. The adaptive layer is still feeding itself corrupted prediction loops. One engineer frowned beside her. "We already isolated the duplicated sequence." Chloe shook her head gently. "Not completely." Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard now while lines of code shifted across the glowing screens. The secondary market response cache is still referencing the damaged model. Ethan stepped closer behind her. "Can you shut it down?" Chloe's eyes stayed on the monitors. "Not safely." Miranda laughed sharply beneath her breath. "Wonderful." Chloe ignored her completely. "If we force a shutdown now, the investor synchronization network could permanently archive corrupted forecasting data." One executive near the control booth looked pale immediately. "That would trigger overnight market panic." Chloe nodded once. "Exactly." Ethan crossed his arms slowly while watching her work. "So what is the alternative?" Chloe paused for half a second, then quietly answered. "We teach the system to stop chasing itself." Several engineers exchanged confused looks. Ethan tilted his head slightly. "Meaning?" Chloe pointed toward the recursive error logs flooding the monitors. "The architecture is designed to adapt dynamically under pressure." Her fingers moved calmly across the keyboard again. "Right now it thinks instability is normal behavior because the correction layers keep validating each other." One engineer blinked. "So we interrupt the validation cycle?" Chloe nodded. "Manually." Miranda stepped forward again. "That would require direct predictive override authority." Ethan looked toward her, and Miranda lowered her voice sharply. "Nobody except senior executives has clearance." Chloe slowly leaned back from the keyboard beneath the cold monitor light. "Then the system stays trapped." Silence settled briefly across the control booth, while another ballroom screen flickered dangerously overhead. Investors were openly leaving tables now to take calls in quieter corners beneath the chandeliers. Reporters refreshed headlines. Executives avoided eye contact. Ethan Carlisle stared at the failing system while snow drifted across the Chicago skyline outside. Then calmly, he removed a silver security credential from inside his jacket pocket and handed it toward Chloe. Several executives visibly reacted at once. "Ethan," Miranda whispered in disbelief. "That is executive override access." Ethan's eyes never left Chloe. "I know." Chloe hesitated before accepting the credential carefully between her fingers. "You understand if this fails, it already is failing." His voice remained calm. "That is why you are here." The ballroom suddenly lost sound again as the audio system crackled overhead. Somewhere near the stage, investors began quietly applauding sarcastically at the collapsing presentation. Ethan heard it. So did everyone else. Miranda looked humiliated beneath the ballroom lights. Chloe inserted the executive credential into the system console. Instantly, several security layers unlocked across the monitors. Rows of hidden predictive architecture flooded the screens in glowing blue patterns while engineers stared in stunned silence at the speed Chloe processed the information. Her fingers moved rapidly now. Calm. Precise. No wasted movement. Ethan noticed something then that unsettled him deeply. Chloe was not guessing. She understood the system better than half the executives who built it. Redirect the adaptive cache, she said softly toward one engineer. Now. The man obeyed instantly. Disable recursive market mirroring. Another engineer followed the instruction without argument. Reduce external synchronization traffic by 30%. More commands. More movement. The room had unconsciously started following the waitress. Ethan watched executives twice her age suddenly waiting for her direction before touching their own systems. Because competence spoke louder than hierarchy once panic arrived. One ballroom screen suddenly stabilized. Then another. Corrupted graphs disappeared slowly from the display walls behind the stage. Investors noticed immediately. Conversations shifted. The room inhaled cautiously for the first time in 20 minutes. Chloe continued typing beneath the monitor light, while snow reflected softly across the ballroom windows behind her. The system is still trying to rebuild the damaged forecast layer. One engineer warned nervously. Chloe nodded calmly. Let it. Miranda frowned. What? Chloe's eyes remained fixed on the monitor. The architecture was never the problem. Her fingers moved one final time across the keyboard. Only the assumptions feeding it. Then suddenly, every ballroom screen stabilized at once. The Carlisle Innovations logo reappeared across the massive LED walls beside clean forecasting projections glowing perfectly beneath the crystal chandeliers. Silence crashed through the ballroom harder than panic ever did. No flickering. No corrupted data. No warning alerts. Just stable systems humming quietly beneath winter light and stunned executive faces. One engineer stared at the monitor in disbelief. She fixed it. Ethan looked toward Chloe Bennett standing beneath the blue glow of the restored system, while investors slowly realized the crisis had vanished. Chloe removed her hands from the keyboard calmly, like someone finishing ordinary work instead of saving a billion-dollar company in front of the entire financial world. Then softly, almost as if reminding herself, she said, "The smartest systems survive by learning when to stop pretending they are perfect." And for the first time all night, nobody in the ballroom laughed at the waitress. For 3 long seconds after the system stabilized, nobody inside the Blackstone Grand Ballroom moved. The restored Carlisle Innovations logo glowed cleanly across the massive LED walls, while accurate forecasting projections rolled smoothly beneath crystal chandeliers and warm amber light. Snow drifted quietly beyond the towering Chicago windows, as if the storm outside understood something extraordinary had just happened inside. Then the ballroom erupted. Not wildly, not emotionally. Wealthy people rarely lost composure loudly. But the sudden explosion of relieved conversation, rapid applause, nervous laughter, and hurried phone calls filled the ballroom like pressure finally escaping a sealed room. Investors immediately sat straighter at their tables. Reporters rushed toward the stage entrance with phones raised higher. Executives who looked seconds away from collapse suddenly remembered how to smile again. Yet through all of it, Chloe Bennett remained standing calmly beside the technical control station beneath the fading blue monitor light. Her black waitress uniform still carried the same silver hotel name tag against the collar. Her posture had not changed. Her expression had not changed. The room around her had. Ethan Carlisle stared at the stabilized screens overhead before slowly turning back toward her. For the first time all evening, the billionaire looked genuinely uncertain. Not about the system. About himself. Miranda Hayes stepped quickly toward the nearest engineers. Verify every external investor feed immediately. Her voice still carried authority, but something underneath it had cracked. Embarrassment. The engineers obeyed instantly. Yet Chloe noticed something strange now. They no longer looked toward Miranda first before acting. They looked toward her. One systems analyst shook his head in disbelief while checking synchronization reports on a tablet. The recursive loop is completely gone. Another engineer laughed softly beneath his breath. I cannot believe she saw it before we did. Chloe quietly removed the executive override credential from the system console and placed it carefully on the control desk, like returning borrowed silverware after dinner. Ethan watched the gesture closely. No triumph. No performance. No attempt to claim ownership of the moment. That unsettled him more than arrogance ever could have. Nearby investors now openly applauded toward the technical station after realizing the crisis had passed. A few reporters even lifted cameras toward Chloe. She immediately stepped backward slightly, uncomfortable with the attention. Ethan noticed that too. Ladies and gentlemen, one investor called loudly from the ballroom tables, raising a champagne glass toward the control booth. I believe we owe the waitress a standing ovation. Laughter followed immediately, but different laughter now. Respectful, warm. The ballroom slowly rose into applause beneath the chandeliers while camera flashes scattered across marble floors and winter-lit windows. Chloe lowered her eyes awkwardly, clearly wishing the floor would swallow her whole instead. Ethan remained silent while watching her reaction carefully. Most people spend entire careers trying to become visible in rooms like this. Chloe Bennett looked like she wanted nothing more than to disappear back into the background. Miranda stepped toward Ethan sharply once the applause softened slightly. We need to manage this carefully. Ethan looked toward her. Manage what? Miranda lowered her voice. Perception. Her eyes shifted briefly toward Chloe. You cannot allow investors to think your company depends on random hotel staff to save corporate systems. Ethan stared at her for several seconds beneath the ballroom lights, then quietly answered, Tonight my company did. Miranda looked stunned by the blunt honesty. Before she could respond, Chloe gently picked up the silver serving tray she abandoned earlier beside table 14. The simple action stopped Ethan completely. What are you doing? Chloe glanced toward him calmly. Returning to work. Several nearby executives looked almost offended by the sentence itself. One investor blinked in disbelief. After all this? Chloe gave a small shrug. People still need drinks. Soft laughter spread through the ballroom again. Yet Ethan did not laugh. He watched her carefully while she moved back toward the ballroom floor carrying the silver tray beneath warm chandelier light, as if she had not just rescued a billion-dollar corporation from public disaster. The contrast felt almost surreal. A senior financial reporter approached Ethan immediately with microphone in hand. Mr. Carlyle, can we have a statement regarding tonight's systems failure? Ethan barely looked toward him. Temporary instability resolved successfully. And the waitress? The reporter pressed quickly. What role did she play? Ethan's eyes followed Chloe across the ballroom, while waitstaff and executives quietly stepped aside for her now in subtle respect. A critical one, he answered simply. Will Carlyle Innovations offer her a position? Another reporter asked immediately. Ethan finally looked away from Chloe long enough to answer. That depends whether she wants one. Across the ballroom, Chloe placed fresh champagne glasses onto an investor table while several executives awkwardly thanked her with the kind of politeness rich people usually remembered only after nearly losing something valuable. One elderly board member stood as she approached. Miss Bennett. Chloe paused politely. Yes, sir. The man smiled gently. I spent 30 years on Wall Street. His eyes moved toward the restored presentation screens overhead. Tonight you reminded me intelligence does not always arrive wearing expensive suits. Chloe smiled faintly. Neither do good systems. The old investor laughed quietly while nearby executives exchanged embarrassed looks. Ethan observed the interaction from across the ballroom beneath the golden lights. Something inside him felt increasingly uncomfortable tonight. Not because Chloe embarrassed him, because she exposed something he spent years building his identity around without questioning. He had trained himself to associate intelligence with credentials, titles, access, executive floors, private offices. Yet the calmest and smartest person in the ballroom tonight carried a hotel-serving tray instead of a corporate title. Rachel Monroe, Ethan's chief communications officer, approached him carefully with a tablet in hand. Social media already picked up the story. Ethan rubbed one hand slowly across his jaw. How bad? Rachel hesitated. Actually, she turned the screen toward him. Headlines already flooded financial platforms. Waitress saves Carlyle Innovations during live system failure. Mystery hotel server outsmarts billion-dollar tech team. Ethan stared at the screen silently. Rachel lowered her voice. People love her. Ethan looked back across the ballroom toward Chloe Bennett carrying champagne beneath crystal chandeliers while snow continued falling softly outside the Chicago skyline. That, he said quietly, might be the first intelligent thing this room has done all night. By 10:30 that night, the atmosphere inside the Blackstone Grand Ballroom had transformed completely. Earlier, the room belonged to executives, investors, and billion-dollar confidants. Now, every conversation eventually circled back to the same person carrying a silver serving tray beneath the chandeliers. Chloe Bennett. Snow continued falling softly across the Chicago skyline outside, while warm golden light reflected against crystal glasses and polished marble floors inside the ballroom. The crisis had passed. The system stabilized. Investors relaxed again. Yet something invisible remained unsettled beneath the surface of the evening. Ethan Carlisle stood alone near the ballroom windows with one hand resting inside his pocket, while reporters continued requesting interviews near the stage entrance behind him. He ignored most of them. Across the ballroom, Chloe quietly collected empty champagne flutes from a nearby table, while guests watched her with a mixture of admiration and confusion. Wealthy people understood talent. They simply preferred it arriving in predictable packaging. Miranda Hayes approached Ethan slowly beneath the amber chandelier light. The board wants a private meeting upstairs. Ethan barely glanced toward her. About what? Miranda folded her arms tightly. About damage control. Ethan looked out toward the snowy city for several seconds before answering. There was no damage. Miranda lowered her voice. A waitress publicly outperformed your senior technology division in front of investors and financial media. Ethan finally turned toward her. Then maybe the problem is not the waitress. Miranda's expression hardened slightly. You are romanticizing this. Ethan almost smiled beneath his breath. No, his eyes shifted briefly toward Chloe moving quietly through the ballroom crowd. I think I am seeing clearly for the first time tonight. Near table 8, an older investor stopped Chloe gently as she reached for an empty wine glass. Miss Bennett. Chloe paused politely. Yes, sir. The man smiled warmly beneath the ballroom light. You should be on the stage tonight, not carrying trays. Chloe answered softly while collecting the glass. Some people solve problems better when nobody is watching. The investor laughed quietly. That may be true. His expression softened afterward. But some people deserve to be seen anyway. Chloe gave a small, grateful smile before continuing through the ballroom. Yet inside, the attention exhausted her. She missed invisibility already. It felt safer, easier, honest. Near the stage entrance, reporters continued discussing her in lowered voices while executives pretended not to overhear them. Did you hear she studied systems analytics? Apparently, she left school after family medical problems. Carlisle should hire her immediately, if she even wants the job now. Chloe heard fragments while walking past them carrying fresh water glasses toward the investor tables. She ignored all of it. Attention from powerful people disappeared quickly once headlines moved on. She learned that lesson years ago. Ethan watched her from across the ballroom, while another executive approached beside him nervously, holding a financial tablet. Sir, the executive said carefully, international investors want reassurance before Asian markets open. Ethan took the tablet slowly. Tell them the systems are stable. They are asking specifically about tonight's incident. Ethan's eyes moved once more toward Chloe. Then tell them the truth. The executive blinked. Sir. Ethan's voice stayed calm. A sharp mind identified a flaw before our leadership team did. He handed the tablet back. That is not weakness. That is survival. The executive walked away looking deeply uncertain how to process a billionaire speaking without corporate ego attached to the sentence. Across the ballroom, Miranda quietly intercepted Chloe near the service station. Enjoying your 15 minutes? Chloe looked up calmly from arranging glasses on a silver tray. I was actually hoping they would end soon. Miranda crossed her arms. You embarrass senior leadership tonight. Chloe answered gently. The system embarrassed senior leadership. Miranda's expression tightened. You think intelligence makes you special? Chloe paused briefly before answering. No, her voice remained soft. I think listening carefully matters more than titles. Several nearby staff members went silent after hearing that. Miranda stepped closer. People like Ethan Carlisle do not trust outsiders. Chloe picked up the silver tray again beneath the warm ballroom lights. Then he should stop hiring people who only agree with him. Miranda stared at her for several seconds before walking away without another word. Ethan had witnessed the exchange from across the ballroom. He noticed something important then. Chloe never raised her voice, never fought for dominance. Yet somehow people still lost arguments against her. Not because she humiliated them, because calm truth left very little room for performance. Rachel Monroe approached Ethan again, carrying updated media reports. You should probably address the ballroom publicly before rumors grow worse overnight. Ethan exhaled slowly beneath his breath. Public statements usually bored him. They sounded polished and empty. But tonight something felt different. Necessary. His eyes moved toward Chloe again, while she quietly adjusted glasses on a silver tray near the ballroom edge. Even now, after saving his company from catastrophe, she behaved exactly the same as before. No arrogance. No self-promotion. No attempt to capitalize on the moment. Ethan realized suddenly that he respected her more for returning to work than for fixing the system itself. Because most people wanted power, Chloe Bennet only wanted dignity. He straightened his charcoal suit jacket slowly beneath the chandeliers. Gather everyone, he told Rachel. Now. Ethan nodded once. Tonight should end honestly. Moments later, the ballroom lights softened slightly while executives, investors, reporters, and hotel staff gradually turned their attention toward the main stage again. Whispered conversations faded beneath the crystal chandeliers as Ethan Carlisle walked slowly back toward the microphone, standing alone beneath the giant restored presentation screens. Snow continued falling quietly beyond the windows while hundreds of eyes followed him through the ballroom. Chloe stopped near the service station, holding a silver tray against one arm. She looked genuinely confused when Ethan's gaze found hers from the stage. Then the billionaire adjusted the microphone softly beneath the warm ballroom lights and said the one sentence nobody in the room ever expected a man like him to say publicly. Tonight, Ethan Carlisle began carefully. I owe an apology to someone I underestimated. The ballroom became so quiet that even the falling snow beyond the towering Chicago windows somehow felt louder. Hundreds of investors, executives, reporters, and hotel staff stood beneath the crystal chandeliers, watching Ethan Carlisle at the microphone, while warm golden light reflected across polished marble floors and untouched champagne glasses. The billionaire founder of Carlisle Innovations rarely apologized. Everyone in the room knew that, which was why nobody moved after hearing his words. Near the ballroom service station, Chloe Bennet remained frozen beside a silver tray resting against one arm, while dozens of eyes slowly turned toward her. Ethan adjusted the microphone slightly. His gray eyes found hers again across the crowded ballroom. Earlier tonight, he said calmly, I assumed intelligence looked a certain way. Silence deepened beneath the chandeliers. I assumed experience belonged only to people with titles, offices, and executive credentials. Several executives shifted awkwardly near the front investor tables. Miranda Hayes lowered her eyes briefly. Ethan continued without softening the truth. And when Miss Bennet challenged my presentation, I treated her like an interruption instead of listening carefully. Chloe looked visibly uncomfortable now. Not proud, not emotional, just uncomfortable being placed at the center of attention she never wanted. Ethan noticed immediately. Yet he kept speaking anyway because some truths became more dangerous when delayed. Tonight, he said quietly, the smartest person in this ballroom was carrying a serving tray. The sentence settled across the room with surprising weight. No one laughed. No one whispered. Several investors slowly began applauding first. Then more people joined. Soon the ballroom filled with long, respectful applause beneath the crystal lights, while reporters lifted cameras higher and executives exchanged uneasy expressions. Chloe lowered her eyes again, almost embarrassed by the reaction itself. Ethan stepped away from the microphone slightly and looked directly toward her. Miss Bennet. Chloe hesitated before answering softly across the ballroom. Yes. Ethan gestured gently toward the stage. Would you join me up here? Hundreds of people turned toward Chloe at once. The attention visibly tightened her shoulders. She glanced briefly toward the hotel manager near the service station, as if silently asking permission to exist inside a moment she never planned to enter. The manager nodded immediately. Slowly, Chloe crossed the ballroom beneath warm chandelier light, while executives and investors stepped aside to make space for her. Snow drifted softly behind the giant windows as camera flashes reflected against the marble floor like winter lightning. Ethan waited quietly beside the microphone while she approached the stage. When Chloe finally stepped beside him beneath the giant Carlisle Innovation screens, the contrast between them felt almost symbolic. Billionaire and Waitress. Tailored charcoal suit beside black hotel uniform. Power beside invisibility. Yet somehow tonight they stood level beneath the lights. Ethan spoke softly enough for only her to hear. I am sorry. Chloe looked surprised by the sincerity in his voice more than the apology itself. You do not owe me that. Ethan gave the smallest shake of his head. Yes, he answered quietly. I do. The ballroom remained silent watching them. Ethan turned back toward the audience. There are people in this room with degrees from Harvard, Stanford, MIT, and every elite institution imaginable. A few uneasy smiles appeared among executives. And tonight none of them caught what Miss Bennet identified in less than a minute. He paused briefly. That matters. Chloe stood quietly beside him beneath the warm lights while applause slowly softened again. Ethan reached into his suit jacket pocket and removed a folded document. Carlisle Innovations would like to formally offer Miss Bennet a senior systems strategy position effective immediately. Audible reactions spread instantly across the ballroom. Several investors exchanged shocked looks. Reporters typed furiously into phones. Miranda closed her eyes briefly like someone accepting defeat with dignity. Ethan extended the document toward Chloe calmly. Full salary. Full benefits. Any educational support you require. Chloe stared at the paper for several seconds without touching it. Then slowly she looked back toward Ethan. Why? The question surprised him slightly. Because you earned it. Chloe's expression softened sadly beneath the chandelier lights. No, Ethan blinked once. No. Chloe shook her head gently. I helped because the system needed help. She glanced briefly toward the restored presentation screens behind them. Not because I wanted something. The ballroom went completely silent again. Ethan lowered the document slowly. You are refusing? Chloe nodded once. Respectfully. Reporters looked almost stunned by the answer. One investor whispered softly. She turned down Carlisle Innovations. Ethan studied her carefully now beneath the warm amber lighting. Most people would accept immediately. Chloe smiled faintly. Most people are trying to become important. Her eyes drifted briefly across the ballroom. I am trying to become peaceful. The sentence landed harder than any speech that night. Ethan suddenly understood something uncomfortable about himself. He spent most of his life chasing importance so aggressively that he forgot peace even existed as a goal. Chloe continued softly. I appreciate the offer. She glanced down toward the silver serving tray, still resting near the stage steps, where she left it earlier. But I do not want tonight to become a transaction. Ethan stared at her for several seconds while snow continued falling outside the Chicago skyline beyond the ballroom windows. Then unexpectedly, he smiled. Not the polished corporate smile investors usually received. A real one. Small. Honest. You know, he said quietly. You are making it very difficult for me to stop respecting you. Soft laughter spread warmly across the ballroom. Chloe smiled slightly too this time. Ethan folded the job offer document calmly and placed it back into his jacket pocket. Then at least allow me to thank you properly. Chloe tilted her head slightly. How? Ethan looked out across the ballroom filled with executives, investors, reporters, and staff beneath the crystal chandeliers. By making sure everyone here remembers tonight correctly. He stepped closer to the microphone one final time. Not as the night a waitress saved my company. His eyes moved toward Chloe again, but as the night intelligence reminded power to stay humble. And beneath the golden lights of the Blackstone Grand Ballroom, nobody looked away from the waitress anymore. The ballroom slowly returned to normal after midnight, but something about the room had permanently changed. Beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Blackstone Grand Hotel, conversations no longer sounded performative or rehearsed. The panic had passed. Investors relaxed into quieter discussions. Reporters packed equipment beside the ballroom entrance. Executives loosened ties and finally breathed like human beings again instead of corporate machinery pretending exhaustion did not exist. Outside the towering Chicago windows, snow covered the city streets in soft silver light, while traffic moved slowly beneath the winter sky. Near the service station, Chloe Bennet carefully stacked clean champagne flutes onto a silver tray while most guests prepared to leave. The ballroom staff had already started clearing tables beneath the warm amber lighting. To everyone else tonight had become history. For Chloe, it still felt like work. You are still doing that. Ethan Carlisle's voice carried softly behind her. Chloe glanced over one shoulder. The billionaire stood beside the marble column without reporters, executives, or security surrounding him for the first time all evening. His charcoal suit jacket rested unbuttoned now, and exhaustion finally showed openly beneath his gray eyes. Chloe smiled faintly. The glasses will not clean themselves. Ethan looked toward the nearly empty ballroom around them. After tonight, I think someone else can handle the glasses. Chloe carefully placed another flute onto the tray. Maybe. Silence settled comfortably between them for a moment, while soft piano music drifted through hidden ceiling speakers above the ballroom. Ethan noticed how different the room felt without panic attached to it. Smaller somehow. More honest. You meant what you said earlier? He asked quietly. Chloe looked toward him. About what? Wanting peace instead of importance. She leaned lightly against the service counter beneath the chandelier glow. Most people who chase importance eventually become exhausted by it. Ethan almost laughed softly. That sounds uncomfortably accurate. Chloe studied him for a second before answering. You built an empire. Ethan slipped one hand into his pocket slowly, and somehow forgot how to sleep through the night. The honesty surprised both of them slightly. Across the ballroom, hotel staff quietly folded white table linens while snow continued drifting outside the giant windows. Chloe spoke gently. People think successful men stop carrying pressure once they become powerful. Ethan smiled faintly beneath his breath. No, his eyes moved across the ballroom. The pressure just becomes more expensive. Chloe laughed quietly for the first time all evening. Real laughter. Small but warm enough to soften the tension that had existed between them since the moment they met. Ethan noticed immediately. There it is. Chloe tilted her head slightly. What? The version of you that is not busy saving corporations. She smiled again despite herself. Then her expression softened thoughtfully. You know what the strange part is? Ethan waited. Chloe looked down briefly at the silver tray in her hands. Tonight was not actually the hardest thing I have ever done. Ethan frowned slightly. No. Chloe shook her head. The hardest thing is walking into rooms where people already decided who you are before you speak. Ethan went quiet after that, because deep down he knew she was right. He had done exactly that. The billionaire looked toward the darkened ballroom stage where hours earlier he challenged her intelligence in front of everyone. Now the stage sat empty beneath soft golden light while workers disconnected equipment in silence. I spent years believing confidence meant always being the smartest person in the room, Ethan admitted quietly. Chloe answered gently. And tonight? Ethan looked back toward her. Tonight, I learned the smartest person usually spends less time trying to prove it. The sentence lingered between them while snow reflected softly against the windows behind the ballroom. Near the entrance, a few remaining reporters noticed Ethan speaking privately with Chloe, but chose not to interrupt. Somehow the moment felt too human for headlines now. Chloe lifted the tray again. I should finish helping before my manager thinks I disappeared. Ethan nodded slowly. Then, after a brief hesitation, he asked, Would you at least let me pay for your tuition if you ever wanted to finish school? Chloe stopped walking for half a second. Not because she expected the offer. Because his voice carried no arrogance behind it this time. No attempt to own the outcome. Just respect. She turned back toward him beneath the warm chandelier light. Maybe someday. Ethan accepted the answer with a small nod. No pressure. No negotiation. That alone told Chloe he had changed more tonight than anyone else realized. Near the ballroom doors, several executives quietly thanked her before leaving while investors shook her hand with the kind of sincerity money usually struggled to purchase. Yet Chloe remained exactly the same through all of it. Calm. Grounded. Unmoved by status. Ethan watched her one last time as she carried the silver tray toward the kitchen hallway beneath the soft winter lighting. Then suddenly Chloe paused near the doorway and looked back toward him. Mr. Carlyle? Yes. She smiled gently. Your system was not failing because it was weak. Ethan frowned slightly. Then why? Chloe glanced briefly toward the snowy city outside the windows. Because it was designed by people too afraid to admit mistakes early. Ethan stood still after hearing that. Somewhere in the distance, snowplows moved slowly through Chicago streets while the ballroom lights dimmed one section at a time behind them. Chloe disappeared quietly into the service hallway carrying the tray exactly as she entered the evening hours earlier. No dramatic exit. No spotlight. Just silence. Ethan remained alone beside the ballroom windows watching snow fall across the city beneath midnight light. And for the first time in years, The billionaire understood something success had never taught him before tonight. The quietest people in the room were often carrying the deepest intelligence of all.